Welcome to Beat Broadcast Episode 4. My name is John Henry,
And I'm Jesse.
and we are here to entertain, educate, and engage with your community. Um, so, what do we have on tap today, Jesse?
We have all kinds of cool stuff. Before we get to that, I would like to urge everybody to please, if you have questions or comments, please go ahead and comment in the feed, and we'll try and get to them as we can. And as always, like it and share it, and invite your friends to like this. And we really appreciate all that support.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit us up on YouTube, Facebook. We don't have an Instagram yet. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe one Instagram account will happen one day. For right now, we're just on Facebook and YouTube. So yeah, welcome back, everybody. So today we are discussing a few important figures in the history of drumming. One of them is the drummer / multi-instrumentalist leader of a band called The Band.
Yes.
And
So
yeah, Jesse's a little more familiar with his whole catalog and the band in general. So he's gonna tell us all about Levon Helm.
yeah, so today is Levon Helm's birthday. It would be. He's no longer with us. He would have been 80 today.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar with Levon, he's an incredible drummer. Definitely one of my drum heroes. He was also a fantastic vocalist, and
Nice.
just had a beautiful voice. And was also a pretty solid mandolin player. He would play some mandolin with the band, which was really cool. So Levon was
cool.
born on May 26, 1940. He was an American musician and actor. If you didn't know that, he was in a few movies. He was in Coal Miner's Daughter,
Okay.
and he was also in The Right Stuff.
The-
And
like
he's
the
done a
space
couple
movie?
other things too. I beg your pardon? What was that?
Is that The Right Stuff? Is that the movie about like
About-
Apollo?
About the astronauts.
Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was in that.
And I think he was right before he passed. He was in Shooter with Mark Wahlberg.
With Marky Mark. Let's just call him Marky Mark.
Marky Mark.
Because he probably hates it. So
Yeah.
Let's just call
So,
him that.
like I said, Levon was one of the vocalists for the band, songwriters, and an incredible drummer. If you're not familiar with the band, I definitely recommend you check them out. That's not where he started. I read that when he was 6 years old, he went and saw Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, and he decided at 6 years old he was going to be a musician, professional musician.
Wow.
And after seeing Bill Monroe, and then at age 8, he started playing guitar and drums, and then just worked it up. And then by the time he was finishing up high school, he was playing with Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, and they toured all over the South, played a bunch of bars and stuff, and did this whole circuit playing,
Yeah.
rock and roll and R&B stuff. And then they wound up going up to Canada and taking the band up there. They would kind of do this tour right up the middle of the United States, all the way into Canada and back and forth up through the Midwest. And then when they were in Canada, Ronnie Hawkins picked up some of the other guys who went on to be in the band, Rick Danko and Robbie Robertson and the rest of the guys. And they toured with the Ronnie Hawkins for about 10 or 12 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided to just go off on their own. And the band became Levon and the Hawks. Levon was one of the primarily one of the lead vocalists. And they went on and toured with that band for a while. And then really their big break came when Bob Dylan asked them to be their backing band. And they went on and did the Newport Folk Fest as Dylan's band when Dylan decided to go electric.
Yeah, which as I remember, or at least as I remember reading about, that was a fairly controversial move for him.
Yes,
right?
it was.
'Cause
People
he had
were
all the
booing.
folkies.
The crowd
all the
was
folkies
booing.
Were like pissed.
Yeah, people were mad because he was taking these tunes, that were, acoustic, basically. And here comes Dylan with the Strat and electric band, and they were just kind of brought it. And I think some people did receive it well, a lot of people didn't. And then they did some touring around that with that band, and Levon just got to the point where he's like, I can't take the people
abusing,
yelling at us. He's like, I'm not on stage to be booed.
Just hordes of angry hippies.
So he went back home and he left left Dylan's band, and went back home and just held up for a couple years and practiced. And then, after they did this big run with Dylan, they did a world tour where the rest of the guys in the band did it. They all wound up settling in Woodstock.
That's right.
New York.
That's right. He had kind of like a compound up there or something, right?
Yeah. Well, they had a house.
Yeah.
And Dylan was living up there, and they were all like, they got Levon to come back to Woodstock and basically rejoin the group.
Mm.
And and there's a bunch of really great documentaries out there about the band and Levon, and Levon's book is really great too. I would recommend that.
Okay.
He has like an autobiography. And,
what do you think their most famous song is? What's one that, if people haven't heard of the band?
Well, what's the band, maybe The Weight.
That
one, it was immensely popular.
Okay.
So they went on, did the band, and then the thing is, they'd be bouncing around Woodstock, on their day off or whatever, and everyone knew Bob Dylan.
Right.
Right, but they didn't know the guys who was playing with them, and they would just be like, "Oh, there's the band."
Yeah.
Right, the people at the grocery store were like, "There's the band," and they're
so they weren't
Dylan,
called
Dylan's
the band at that point.
And then that's really how it stuck.
Yeah,
it was Bob Dylan and the band, and then from there they're just like, "We're keeping the name. We are the band." So they did it, and they went on to record and do their own albums and have their own career from there. It's pretty cool stuff. If you look at some of these early recordings of Levon, especially just talking some of the gear he was playing, his big thing is a lot of times you'd see him playing these really old kits. He'd have an old Ludwig or Slingerlands, maybe like a Leedy, and he'd have these big, wood hoops on his toms, big deep toms, almost like field drums.
Wow.
And
what do you mean by field
really
drums?
cool? What's that?
What do you mean by field drums?
Like Civil War kind of era, like that sort of depth,
like
big snare drums,
rope tightened,
very thin,
wood hoop
thin
snare
shells.
drums?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Like rope tightened, like those kind of like.
No, he had lugs on these drums.
Okay.
I don't think you could. I think you'd be hard pressed to be a touring drummer and have rope tuned drums.
Yeah.
And even calfskin heads at that point. I mean, guys did it, but by this point it was the 70s, and they had modern heads.
But he was trying to evoke kind of an older sound, it sounds like.
Well, and he was getting it, and it was great. And for what the band was doing, and remember at the time, especially late 60s or early 70s, psychedelia and all this experimental music was becoming very popular, and the band was kind of going the opposite direction.
Right.
Where they were playing songs,
yeah.
And they weren't really jamming.
Right.
There was no jam there. These are tight arrangements, and it was kind of going the other direction. Really, it's kind of, takes from that sort of Great American Songbook kind of concept and really applies it to rock and roll. And I think that's what makes them so interesting.
They always seemed like a very American kind of group to me, you know,
Yes.
in a way that, I don't know, just like, it seems very, folky, but also kind of Southern. I guess he's Southern. But, so it surprised me at one point that I heard that, they were based up in New York, because I was like, I always thought these guys were just kind of, kind of good old Southern boys,
Well, most of those guys were Canadian.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Right?
no. And like I'm saying, they hooked up with Ronnie Hawkins when they were in Canada, and then Levon was from Arkansas.
Right.
And, but they were constantly on the road at that point. And so really he was playing this mishmash of drums there for a long time when he was with the bands. He wasn't really getting endorsements or anything at that point.
Right.
I don't know. I'm sure if he ever really got endorsements.
Yeah.
So they did that, and then the band played, and then in 1976 on Thanksgiving they played The Last Waltz, and Scorsese filmed the movie, of course.
That's
and
right. There's a whole. Is
it's
that a
incredible.
documentary? Of
It's kind of a documentary. There is some
Okay.
behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
It's mostly a concert film, I would say.
And it was
Uh,
filmed on in his his place up in Woodstock.
I don't know if they were still. I don't think at that point if they were still up there or not. I don't remember.
Okay.
Great film though,
I need to watch that.
so they, at that point the band kind of just broke up. They stopped touring and like they were. Everyone was burnt out. They had done 10 or 12 years with Hawkins and then Dylan's thing, and then 10 years or so with as the band, and
Wow.
toured hard the whole time.
Wait, this is 76 they broke up?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And then, so they didn't really go on. They did do a couple one-off gigs as the band, but Robbie Robertson wasn't part of it, and it wasn't the full lineup.
Yeah, he kind of went off on a solo career that was fairly successful himself, right? Because he
Yes.
he was the lead singer
He was a guitar player.
or guitar
right.
player, but also singer. But
He
Levon
sang-
Helm
he
also
sang some-
sang too. He was a singing.
Yes,
drummer,
Levon
right?
sang, but really, I mean, Richard Manuel, he did a lot of the singing in with the band, and
Okay.
and so did Rick Danko, and so that was something that I always really dug about the band is you had all these guys who were able to lead a tune, and I remember seeing in one of the interviews, or maybe it was one of the films, it was they would write a tune and then they would figure out who in the band could sing it the best, and that would be the guy,
Yeah.
to do it.
That's cool. It kind of reminds me in a, not stylistically, but in a kind of way of like Wolfpack, like all those dudes in that band
Right,
are
it's
like
in flux.
super
Well,
multi-talented, multi-instrumentalist, vocalists,
Yes.
guitarists, drummers. They're got that.
And that's
kinda,
a cool point to make. Like I'm saying with Levon, is he was such an incredible singer, and he could play drums and sing. And there's not a lot of drummers out there who really can do that and lead. I was trying to brainstorm about like who are some famous singing drummers. I mean,
Phil Collins.
Phil Collins.
That's the one.
But I
everyone-
mean, but there aren't a lot of them.
no.
Guys sing backups on the drums. I mean,
No.
you could say Dave Grohl, I guess, but now he's out front playing guitar.
Right. He kind of made that transition to full on front man.
Ringo. I mean, Ringo sang some.
Yeah.
And so anyways, so they did that. The band kind of broke up, and then Levon went on to have his own sort of a second career or another career where during the 80s and he actually played in Ringo's All-Star band.
What
Ringo
was that? I remember
Starr's
hearing
All-Star
about what
band.
was Ringo's All-Star band? Was that like
It was just basically the Ringo Starr band.
playing
But
Ringo
Levon
tunes, or was he
and Rick
playing-
Danko were in this band.
Okay.
And what would happen is Ringo would get out from behind the drums and sing, and Levon would be the drummer.
Oh, okay.
Now, there are other times I've seen concert footage of them where there actually be two drummers playing at one, Ringo and another drummer
Okay.
playing. But that was pretty cool. But I thought this was pretty neat. I saw this, later in life, he went to a more modern kit. He was playing Yamahas.
Who?
a
Levon
lot.
Helm?
Levon was,
Mhm.
but Ringo gave him one of his Ludwig snare drums from like his Beatles era kits. And I
Wow.
saw a picture with Levon with the drum.
Wow.
And Levon played that drum for a while.
I would.
Heck yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
how much mojo is on that thing, right?
Yeah.
So Levon went on, he did the Ringo thing, and then, later he wound up developing throat cancer.
All right.
He lost his voice for a while, and then he kind of had he came back, he got his voice back, and he came out with Dirt Farmer, which is an incredible album. And then after that, Electric Dirt, also a great album. And then he was still living in Woodstock, and he was doing, up until the time he passed, they were still doing them even after he passed, as they were doing these midnight rambles, which were basically barn parties
Yeah.
with a band in it.
All right.
I wish I could have gotten up there to see him when he was alive. I mean, that was definitely something that it was on my radar. I wanted
heard
to
about.
go.
Yeah, I remember hearing about those. Like it was like still going on in the early. When did he die again?
He died about, I want to say like 3 years ago or so.
Okay.
I don't have that information in front of me.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
let me
sorry.
Look it up.
2012. That was longer ago than I thought.
Okay. Yeah, I remember hearing like in the mid 2000s about like how they're still doing these
You could go to these parties. Yeah.
parties. I was like, I don't know. I mean, I was never a big, huge band fan, to be quite honest. I appreciated their stuff, but it wasn't anything that I sought out. But I remember hearing about that and being like, well, that would just be interesting, just as a, just to see it and just as a kind of a witness a bit of musical
history. It'd be an
history.
event, I'm sure. And so, and like you're saying about him switching instruments, he would do that. He would come out from behind the kid, even with the band, like when they did Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, he'd come out, play mandolin. Richard Manuel would come back and play the drums.
Yeah.
And he was the keyboard player.
That's the one song that I remember the most from them. Is that the whole title of the song, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down?
Yes.
Like the night they drove old Dixie down, and the song was singing, and that one to me is the one that's. I mean, if I had to name a band, I think that's maybe like I'm gonna expose that's maybe the only band song that I can name that's like I know it.
The thing about Levon too that always stuck with me was about his playing was it wasn't super flashy. He was always like. He was like the working man's drummer, man. He was just holding it down, putting it right there and playing it clean. And just, he had great tone and he wasn't playing a bunch of extra stuff, just really serving the tunes. And I think that was one thing. I mean, I love the band. They're definitely one of my top 10 groups of all time. Probably. I love them. And, definitely has been an inspiration to me. Especially when I'm going out playing that kind of music, I'm like, man, I'm trying to channel this.
Well, yeah, you're getting into. I mean, you play with the Woodshedders, and you've played with a bunch of, kind of more, I guess you might call it Americana type acts.
Yeah.
You played with who was the guy you toured in Germany with last year?
Randy Thompson.
Randy Thompson. Yep. He's kind of like, like country rock,
and country, kind of stuff
with a kind of a modern edge to it, right? But like in West Virginia, you're playing a lot more of that stuff, so I can. I can see that being more of an influence. And you play a little banjo yourself, don't you?
That's right. And that's really how I hooked up with a lot of these guys. Is I was playing banjo for fun. I played with the Speakeasy Boys for a while, and then I met a lot of people in the bluegrass world.
I just found a Speakeasy Boys CD when I was going through my CDs last week. By the way, I've got a Speakeasy. I gotta re-listen to that. But anyway, continue.
But one thing I would say about that, when I learned to play banjo, and I was just learning that for fun, hanging out at the campfire, jamming with my buddies,
Right.
It's way more portable than a drum set, right?
Well, it is a membranophone instrument with a drum
That's
head
right.
on
It's
it.
a drum with strings,
so
man.
It's kind of a drummer's stringed instrument.
By doing that, when I started playing banjo, I then learned this entire other repertoire of music from, in the bluegrass world, folk music, old time music, and it opened my ears up to all these different sort of styles or really the songbook. And so
when you say songbook, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by songbook? Like, is that
just like the songbook of bluegrass and old time music,
right?
And that kind of stuff, opposed to say the jazz song, like
the real book. So is there sort of like a real book equivalent of like American folk tunes that's called the songbook?
There are like fiddlers fake books, and there are sort of compendiums. I mean, there's that kind of stuff of this stuff. There's sort of like the Lomax, Alan Lomax stuff, where it's more of like, older stuff, old time tunes, and Stephen Foster kind of stuff, So, but when I started playing, so I met a lot of these cats playing acoustic music, and then of course, all these guys knew I was a drummer as well. So then it was like, well, hey, can you add drums to this thing? And especially in the last 15 years, that sound has become way more popular.
Yeah.
Electrified, Americana roots, electrified stuff with, banjos and fiddles and lots of bands doing that.
If I hear Ho Hey by the Lumineers one more time, I will straight up punch through a wall.
That doesn't count. I don't even want to go there.
Drove me bonkers. I was like, oh, it's like, hey.
We can talk about that band off air.
Hey ho. We're just
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair.
What's that?
To lump those in. There's some great bands out there.
Yeah,
and,
I'm
you know,
sure
hey,
they're
those
I'm sure
guys,
they're
I mean,
super
more power to them.
talented.
They're making money playing music.
I'm
but-
sure they're very talented, but you know, come on, you can't like everything. So, and that was
Yeah,
like when that came out,
so-
I was like, oh God, please, not again.
one more little note on Levon before we move on. I did want to mention this. On I Shall Be Released. This was a really cool thing that I picked up. This was in one of their films, and the snare drum part is very sparse, and it's got this zhap, zhap, right? And it's like, man, how are they doing that? And what he did on this is he literally took the bottom of the snares,
Yeah.
and it would play boom, boom, boom.
Nice.
And Levon's whole thing was in the interview, he was like, I just decided, you know, we were trying to get that sound in the studio, and like, yeah, you could replicate that, I guess, with a,
Yeah.
but maybe it was a little too harsh, right?
Yeah.
So he decided, why don't I just strum the snare wires just like I'm strumming a, you know, a
Yeah.
guitar? You
Yeah.
know? Sha.
Like a
And
little.
that's how they get. So if you get a chance, go back and listen to the band version of that,
What's
the
the song
studio
again?
version, and he does it. You see him do it live, and he's playing the kit, but
Right.
the studio version, put your ear to it, and you're like, holy smokes, that is exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Shh, just scraping the strings,
Almost
just
like a
scraping the
little-
wires.
Yeah, like a little washboard effect or something.
And I thought, man, that is cool.
What's
know?
what's the song again that he does that on?
All right.
Oh, yeah. What song was that again that he does that? The snare
That
wire.
is I Shall Be Released
I Shall Be Released.
by the band. Yes.
Nice.
Okay. So, anyways, I think we could. So, happy birthday, Levon.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the
R.I.P.
inspiration.
Levon Helm.
I will say, just as a side note, if anyone's watching this right now, real time, I did see that they are going to be broadcasting off the Levon's page tonight. They're going to be broadcasting his concert live from the Ryman in Nashville. If anyone's interested, I would suggest you go over there, check that out. They're going to do the Ramble at the Ryman concert, and it's free.
Yeah.
So that's 8 o'clock Eastern.
Well, before we transition, Brian Kaczynski commented, when you look at a song like The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, it's hard to believe the whole band weren't from the South. And that was, to be honest, my impression the entire time. I was like, oh, okay, they're just it's like a Southern rock band, kind of like almost like Skinnerd or whatever, you know, kind of that vibe. But apparently they were half American, half Canucks. So
yeah. I'm sorry. Someone just commented here or sent me a thing. You know, it wasn't those guys at Newport. It was the guys from Paul Butterfield's band backed them up. But then the guys from the band later went on to play with Dylan, and they did the big tour, and they were getting booed.
Yeah.
You know, all over the place. So
Yeah.
just wanted to clear that up.
Don't mess with Dylan's hippies.
Yeah, man, you gotta get it right. All right. So, anyways, let's move on. We have another famous musician's birthday today, and that's Miles Davis.
That's right.
And also another musician who's had a big impact on so many of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Miles Davis, you can't really get bigger than that in the jazz world. Yeah, so you know, Kind of Blue, I think, was maybe my first real introduction to, you know, kind of modal jazz, and kind of came right in the middle of that cool jazz era, but I guess it sort of got called cool jazz. I don't know if it necessarily fit the, you know, that stereotype or something, but I think it went on to become, I think Kind of Blue is the best-selling jazz album in history. I think it's been even declared like to be a national treasure by the National Archives, which is, I mean, I don't know how many albums there are.
I wouldn't dispute that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the quintessential cool jazz, you know, album to listen to, you know, when you're kind of just, and it just has this very, you know, peaceful quality to it that, I don't know, it's the kind of thing that like you listen to and you just feel cool, you know? It's like you just feel like strolling around, taking it, but like with a kind of an edge. And I don't know.
Yes.
What was your first experience with Kind of Blue? I
Kind of
think I,
blue. I was in college.
yeah,
Um, I was just getting into jazz. I had started playing jazz probably around my senior year of high school, jazz band, and then when I got into college, I got more into it. And then when I got into the college band, started taking lessons and playing in the combo. A lot of that was real book work in my combo, and so it was. I remember playing all blues,
right.
and it's that's really for people learning to play jazz. That's usually one of the ones you start off on.
Yeah.
It seems to be. It's accessible.
Well,
And so
yeah.
from there, of course, I got the Miles album and was instantly into it. Now, when I was a kid, I played trumpet, so I've always been attracted to trumpet players. And so that was Miles was a no brainer for me. I just got into it,
Right.
and then it went from there. Of course, but
So,
definitely Kind of Blue. I mean, I think I still have the CD that I bought way back when
yeah.
up in the rack, and
I think your Miles Davis starter kit, in college was like Kind of Blue and Bitches Brew. It was like
yeah,
a lot of
it's
people just
both
sort of
ends.
skipped that 10-year period, like 59 to
play
69, and then you kind of went from like chill Miles to like totally crazy Miles with the Bitches
Right,
Brew
I
double
definitely had
album.
both those records, still
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
and still love them. And
yeah,
it's like, what mood am I in? Where am I trying to? Is it
yeah,
Sunday morning and I want to listen to Kind of Blue, or is
yeah,
it like Friday night? Let's turn it up and
yeah.
get weird with
Let's-
you know. And
yes. Oh, so yes, it was. The album was one of 50 recordings and chosen in 2002 by the Library of Congress to be added to the National Recording Registry, and in 2003 was ranked number 12 on Rolling Stone's magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. I don't know how much those lists necessarily mean anything, but it's pretty indisputable. This is, I mean,
yeah,
it's the most famous, most best-selling jazz album in history. Maybe
yeah,
uh, edging out Dave Brubeck's
time out.
Time Out album,
Yeah.
right?
Now we do have to while we're talking about Miles, we cannot leave out the drummer on this because he just
right,
passed.
right. So Jimmy Cobb was the drummer on Kind of Blue.
Yes.
Jimmy Cobb was from D.C., as I found out. He grew up was born in D.C. And before he began his music career, listened to jazz albums, stayed awake into the late hours of the night in order to listen to Symphony Sid performing in New York City. He started his touring career in 1950 with saxophonist Earl Bostic and played with Dinah Washington, Wynton Kelly, Cannonball Adderley, who I believe recommended him to Miles for the band.
For the sextet.
Yeah,
And he was married to Dinah Washington.
Cobb was?
Yes.
I didn't realize. Okay.
Yes, but he also played with her and Sarah Vaughan as well.
Right. Okay.
And then Wes Montgomery, a bunch of the Wes Montgomery stuff.
Yeah.
So which is really hip.
The drumming on Kind of Blue is sort of, like Levon Helm. It's really serving the music. It's not flashy. I mean, everything they're doing in there is really just kind of like
yes,
quarter
that's
notes
what,
on
I
the
think that's
ride,
what
just a little comping, nothing, crazy. And it seems like that sort of typified his personality too. It's interesting how his personality kind of played through in Kind of Blue, because he tended to avoid the spotlight and a lot of, he wasn't flashy, and
right.
it seems like that's maybe exactly what Miles was looking for, for that album.
Yeah, so the thing with Jimmy Cobb, especially on that, his style is he would play he'd play that swing pattern but he'd really drive the quarter note within that.
Right.
Right, and then he would often play this kind of a passage, Freddie Freeloader.
Yeah.
And what he's doing there is he's creating this space for the band to work it,
Mhm.
right? You know, I mean, you got Miles, Cannonball, and Coltrane blowing solos on this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just lays it back.
Yeah.
You know, and
absolutely.
or Bill Evans too, and just lays it back, and it's so smooth, and that really style really kind of, if you listen to his other tracks, it really carries
Yeah.
through a lot of the stuff he did.
Yeah. I mean, when I was
I was
doing
listening to
jazz gigs, it was like you could, you could get through almost an entire gig just kind of like imitating Jimmy Cobb, just on, just doing a straight ride, quarter note ride, and basic jazz, jazz swing pattern,
comps.
just a little, it's like if you weren't, I was never what you, I don't, I learned the basics of jazz, and I can kind of get along, but I've never been what I would consider a jazz drummer. But on all the gigs I did, it was kind of like that was my go-to beat. That was my go-to rhythm, and just when in doubt, just kind of hang back and let the music speak, and just really just keep time with that quarter note pulse, and the hats on the 2 and the 4, and kind of there you go. There's your gig. There's your jazz brunch gig.
Yeah. So one thing when I was kind of doing some of the research on him, I thought was pretty interesting was how he got the gig with Miles.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So what had happened? It was Philly Joe Jones was playing with them, and he was just flaking out and not showing up to rehearsals.
Right. Right.
I don't know why. I mean, we can probably guess why not, but
Yeah.
he was not showing up, and so Jimmy Cobb says he gets his call from Miles, and he's like, "Hey, I got a gig tonight in Boston."
Right.
And Jimmy Cobb is like, "I'm in New York City, like it's 4 hours away." Like,
Yeah.
and he's like, what am I supposed to do? And Miles just was like, "Do you want the gig or not?"
Yeah.
And
in his
so Jimmy
understated
Cobb got
yet
up there. He
forceful
got
way.
himself up there and wound up, later on wound up playing on Sketches of Spain, right? Porgy and Bess, all these other Miles CDs or albums, and it's really cool, man. And I mean, that's just goes to show you can be a great. I mean, Philly Joe Jones, come on, and then
smoking.
you just don't show up to your gig, man.
He was
So
at
if you
home
don't show up
watching
to
YouTube
rehearsal-
too much. That's what he was probably doing. He was just at home vegging out on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't think so. All right.
It's been the scourge of everybody's
What?
attention span for 50 years, and no one knew. So yeah, it's all about showing up. There you go.
Yeah.
Moral of the story.
It's all about showing
all
up.
about
Yeah.
showing up for the gig, folks. So
Or the rehearsal, or
Take
whatever is
a-
asked of you.
take a cue from Jimmy Cobb, and sometimes it's just about being there, serving the music, and hanging back and kind of letting the music flow, and providing that rhythmic bass. So
Yes.
yeah, R.I.P. Jimmy Cobb, another legend, of the jazz world, and the last remaining member of the original Kind of Blue
Yes.
group, which
Yes.
he was for the last 30 years. Since when did Miles die?
No, I think it was the late 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
88. I don't know. It was somewhere around, maybe.
I don't
early
know.
90s. We gotta be better jazz historians here.
Yeah.
Speaking of Miles and Jimmy, I kind of put together another little like improv remix situation here. So what do you say? You think you want to move into some?
Go ahead, spin it for us, buddy. Let's
All
see
right.
what you got.
Let me do a little setup here, but I'm gonna switch to DJ Cam here. Hold on.
Yeah, while he's doing that, once again, everybody, please feel free to comment, and we'll try and get to your comments. And we love having everybody here with us.
All right. So I'm going to just do a little kind of remix of So What, which is the opener track off of Kind of Blue here. So here we go. Let me start this over. I think I had my sync wrong. Give me let me redo. This is live on the fly, folks. So pardon the restart here. Okay, there we go.
Yes.
That was a little live remix of "So What" by Miles Davis by yours truly. And what else can we say here about Jimmy Cobb? What's did you have any point, when you're listening to Miles Davis or any of Jimmy Cobb's records, what's kind of some of the beats or some of the standout features of his playing for you?
Well, I think we kind of touched on it earlier when we just said, he played that straight line, and it was there supporting the rest of the band. And I think that was, for a big takeaway. It wasn't real up front.
Right.
You listen to other drummers like Elvin Jones or something where he's right on top of it. And that's great. And I love that stuff. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But, to see that sort of like contrast in that style, you're like, yeah, you can lay it back and play it cool and support those other guys and still play tasty stuff. I mean, he was no slouch. He was a great drummer.
Sure. Yeah.
But to kind of get the sense of that like openness, and but still keeping that really nice time, having that nice time that just helps keep that everything floating through. I think that for me that was a big takeaway. When I was first getting into it, I was listening to that album a lot and just kind of soaking it in. But I wouldn't say that he was one of the drummers I was really seeking and like trying to get their stuff. I was way more into Art Blakey is probably one of my favorite jazz drummers. I love his stuff, and I would play it over and over and over again because I'm like, oh man, what's he doing there? I want to get that.
Mm-hmm.
But whereas the Jimmy Cobb stuff, it was so subtle, and it was like, yeah. And then I think, I'm not necessarily trying to steal a lick as much as I'm like, catch that vibe.
Yeah.
That he's putting out there. For me, that was the big takeaway on his material.
Nice. Well, I think we'll end it on that note. R.I.P. Jimmy Cobb. A real lifetime of amazing achievements in the jazz world. Played with loads of people. And one thing he's one of these guys that kind of stuck in that world. He some jazz drummers kind of do some collaborations with people outside. When I look at the list of his collaborators, I mean, it's almost all just jazzers, jazz cats. So, he really seemed like he was very dedicated just to that art form. That's that's something you don't see too much, is people just really, honing in specifically on one type of music, with so much out there now, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for this week, episode 4. Next week, we have a monster episode, after which we are going to move to kind of a bi-weekly format. And because, once a week is kind of a little much to, produce one of these every week. We got, other stuff we're working on. So we figured we'd do this bi-weekly. So starting, next episode will be next Tuesday, but after that, we'll be doing them every 2 weeks.
Yes.
So next week,
yes,
we have one John Henry Bonham, one of my favorite drummers, probably one of the most influential drummers of all time, and that's a loaded subject for any drummer, but we got to cover it because his birthday's coming up. So tune in next week, and we'll have some real special like Bonham drumming examples and all kinds of fun stuff for that. So that's going to be a super fun one. And anything else? Am I missing anything?
That's it. Thank you all very much. Like, share, subscribe, hit the tip bucket if you're feeling it. And we will see you back here on Tuesday at 7:00. Thank you.
That's it. All right.